Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Good day and welcome to the CFA Asset Owner Council's World Bank IMF Annual Meetings Week virtual launch of the CFA's SDGs and ESG Infrastructure Investment Impact Framework. This marks the occasion of the launch of our global asset owner industry SDG investment framework that uniquely measures the impact of the SDGs and ESG on infrastructure and real asset investments and portfolios. My name is Hubert Danso and I am the CEO and Chairman of Africa Investor and the Chair of the CFA New York's Asset Owners Advisory Council, and will facilitate the official launch of the CFA SDGs and ESG Infrastructure Impact Framework launch. By way of background, during the annual 2019 CFA Climate and ESG Asset Owners Summit, hosted in partnership with the Principles for Responsible Investment, a resounding theme was the dearth of information available to assist asset owners measure the impact of their real asset portfolios on both ESG and the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. To address this challenge, the Asset Owners Advisory Council approached GRESB, the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, CISL, and Africa Investor, AI, as technical partners to work with a high-level brain trust of asset owners to investigate the creation of a framework for asset owners to measure the impact of infrastructure assets on the delivery of the SDGs and ESG. I chaired the Global Summit's infrastructure panel, with speakers from the UN Joint Staff Pension Fund, APG, JP Morgan, and GRESB. And at that point, I undertook to chair this initiative, with the phase one goal being to launch the foundational framework platform developed by and for asset owners to measure the impact of infrastructure assets on the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals and ESG, and in time for the 2020 World Bank IMF annual meetings. Challenged as we have been by COVID-19 to deliver this task, this would not have been possible without the dynamic support, insights and leadership from the Brain Trust members and technical team, and I would like therefore to thank them again, particularly the Brain Trust members and the technical team, for their unwavering support in terms of getting us to this position to meet the goal and the timeline for today's launch event. I would also like to add a special mention to the GRESB team and CFA New York for always so gracefully going above and beyond our expectations to deliver a unique framework initiative. By way of recognition, the Brain Trust collaborators include the CFA Asset Owner Council, UNPRI, the Investors Association, the Global Listed Infrastructure Organization, the Long-Term Infrastructure Investors Association, the World Pensions Council, the UN Joint Staff Pension Fund, Pensions for Purpose out of the UK, the Council of Institutional Investors, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism, GRESB, SASB, the Continental Business Network, the African Sovereign Wealth and Pension Fund Leaders Forum, GIN, and Africa Investor. This launch is designed to provide you with an introduction to and insights on the framework and its user guide, which was developed with numerous rounds of industry input, refinement, consultation, and support over the last 12 months ahead of this formal launch on schedule during this week's World Bank IMF annual meetings. The program for today's launch will feature a keynote interview with Jingdong Hua, the Vice President and Treasurer of the World Bank Group, to remind us about the important impact we as asset owners are and can have on the sustainable finance and infrastructure Build Back Better investment agenda. That will be followed by the unveiling and presentation of the framework and the methodology, which will then be followed by a panel of our Brain Trust leaders and conclude with closing remarks. So to get us going, it's my distinct pleasure to invite one of the luminaries and great visionaries. I think many of us take for granted the green, climate and sustainable finance agenda. But let me remind you, these things come through leadership and innovation and just sheer determined approaches to wanting to change the world for a better place. And I can personally say, having known him for a good number of years, that is all embodied in the role that Jingdong Hua has played, in really driving this climate finance and sustainable finance agenda. So it's my pleasure to invite Jingdong to join me for the launch keynote interview on global sustainable finance, infrastructure investing, and the role that asset owners can play in the leadership thereof. So Jingdong, a real pleasure, as always, to have you here with us, and thanks for your continued support and leadership with our initiatives and making the time during probably the busiest period in your calendar. It only goes to show your deep support and commitment to working with and supporting the asset owner community on our ESG and SDGs investing journey. So let me just start by saying, we know, the biggest issue that we're all confronted with is COVID-19. This crisis has really affected the way that we understand the challenges and the opportunities that have been thrown up by that. I'd be really interested to get your views on how that has impacted the whole issue of sustainable infrastructure. Over to you, Jingdong.
Thank you so much, Hubert. I'm so delighted to meet you virtually. Normally, you and I meet in a city in Africa, in London, where our, common passion for Africa, for our efforts in connecting global savings to infrastructure financing in Africa drives us together. And of course, your question is very relevant, and the fact that we have to meet virtually, and the World Bank is hosting its annual meeting for the first time virtually really shows the great impact of COVID-19. Look, COVID-19 started as a health pandemic, but I think very quickly people realized an unprecedented devastation, not only to the health, but social and economic life of the whole world economy. Now, I'm conscious I'm addressing asset owners, and CFA New York asset owners certainly is a key part of global savings that plays a huge role in determining the future of the world economy and, in a sense, the future of humanity. So in that sense, this is a very important event that you organize. So certainly very much delighted that you invited me to share some of our thoughts. So, at the onset of the annual meeting, our president actually highlighted some of the devastation. And let me just cite some numbers. Yeah, the first number is that by next year, we estimate between 110 to 115 million people would have been falling into extreme poverty, that is under $1.9 a day. That is the first time poverty has increased in a whole generation. 1.6 billion children are locked out of school in developing countries, therefore depriving them of the opportunity to receive a regular education so they can become productive force when they grow up. Now, when it comes to the world of finance, I think the situation is even more, challenging. Look, I would say in Europe and in the United States, in spite of all the problems, European and US government and their central banks have been able to come up with stimulus packages worth trillions of euros and trillions of dollars. What about the more than 100 countries that don't have that resources? And for the time being, private sector investors are actually taking money out of it, right? So that impact is really devastating. I'll give you a couple of examples. Global remittance is a major source of financing for many developing countries. So remittance to developing countries is over 100 billion a year. And we predict probably the drop, given many of the overseas workers have lost their jobs, it could be over more than 20%. That's $20 billion less going to developing countries. And you and I know that many African countries rely on exporting commodities, right? Commodity prices have really dropped because global supply chain manufacturing activities have dropped. That's another lost revenue. One more thing, Hubert, and this is very familiar to you, is that many African governments over the past 15 years has been able to tap the Eurobond market, right? The price may be a little more expensive compared with financing from the World Bank, yet those governments are well on its path to establish their own credit rating, their own independent access to the international bond market. That has also been stopped, right? So really, I think the devastation, whether it's health, social, economic, is really very severe. And they lack the central bank, a government fiscal space to rapidly come up with additional financing. And this is where I have to say I'm very proud that the World Bank Group in early March, working with our shareholders, very quickly came up with a global package of $160 billion of financing in the next 15 months to help countries to cope with the immediate crisis, but also, as we wanted to focus this conversation on, in addition to the immediate relief, we will also focus on restructuring and eventually a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery. And that would demand even more infrastructure financing, which has to be deployed in supporting those countries in the renewed effort. So I think the situation is pretty challenging, given we are still in the acute stage of coping with the health and pandemic-related issues. But I think I'm glad we are already planning to help countries on the second and third stage. And we'll come back to talk about some of the most specific areas.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jingdong, for really setting the scene there. I don't think anyone is not going to be able to relate to everything that you have just said. And from the asset owner community side, we are looking at many different ways to be able to play our role responsibly and contribute towards the Build Back Better agenda through our capital and knowing its impact. And as we know, the infrastructure is a key part of that particular conversation, which is why we've launched this framework here today that addresses that and creates alignment with the SDGs, and tapping into the highest compliance and best ESG practice at the same time to measure impact. But I'd like your views, if you could just go into a bit more detail, because we all know that that infrastructure plays a key role in enabling economic growth. But I'd like your views on what does this really mean in the context of addressing the key pressing social issues of the Global Development Agenda 2030, in your opinion? Over to you, Jingdong.
Yeah, the World Bank Group is fully committed in supporting the United Nations SDG goals. Among many goals which we work on, the focus of the World Bank is the twin goals of eradicating poverty and boosting shared prosperity. And now with poverty level actually increasing, that job is even more urgent. But let's not forget the long-term goal is really to lifting the bottom 40% of the world's population, not only out of poverty, but so remote from poverty. That's what we call build shared prosperity, right? So that, we will make progress also on addressing inequality. Infrastructure is truly key in everything we do in addressing poverty. Give you a couple of examples, right? Hubert, just imagine if this pandemic had happened 10 years ago. I couldn't imagine the digital infrastructure would have been robust enough so that business continues. We're talking about developed world. The fact that we're doing a virtual meeting, and it is because of digital infrastructure. Many kids in developed countries continue benefit from being able to access online education, go to school virtually and everything. What about the 1.6 billion children in developing world? If there had been infrastructure, whether it's broadband, whether it's 4G, 5G, whether it's basic telecom, so on and so forth, that already tells that infrastructure is critical. Another factor, of course, is logistics, right? Now, in the United States with Amazon, even though people are locked down, the road transport infrastructure is such that you can order online and get your things delivered right away. But we cannot say of those same conditions in many developing countries. So here, I can share some numbers, right? So 840 million people live more than 2 kilometers from all-weather road. Nobody would deliver anything to them. 1 billion people still lack electricity, and 4 billion people lack internet access. Even in Kenya, as we say, with M-Pesa, Kenya is way ahead in other African countries when it comes to, financial inclusion. But it is a 2G technology, as you know, Hubert, right? And therefore, smartphone, higher bandwidth, where you can study, you can learn, that is still lacking. I read somewhere, maybe from Africa investors, that even outside of South Africa, even the highest penetration of smartphone in sub-Saharan Africa is no more than 20% of all the phones, where in the United States, I'm sure it's 80, 90, if not 100%. So I'm just using this example to showcase infrastructure is fundamental to any society if they have a chance to escape poverty and for people to avail of opportunities for employment, for entrepreneurship. And I'll tell you something else, which is very interesting. In Nigeria, almost 40% of food produced are actually wasted. Globally, about a third of all food produced are wasted. And that waste alone actually generates 8% of the total carbon emission of the world. It's fascinating. And this is an area that not a lot of people actually know, right? Now, what does 8% represent? If food waste is a country, its carbon emission would be only the third largest country after the United States and China. If it is an industry sector, it would be the third largest emitter after energy and transport. Now, how do we address this? Actually, the World Bank found that having great roads, having cold storage and logistics, right, would sharply reduce food waste. That itself is critical infrastructure, right? Food waste is such an outrageous situation where 1 in 11 people in the world still suffer from hunger and malnutrition. So, there are so many elements to infrastructure that is deficient in developing countries. And you and I can spend an hour, 2 hours to talk about it, but I hope just these, couple of examples could showcase the urgent need. And of course, I'll come back to sustainability, why resilience sustainability is important later on. But let me just stop here so that we can move to the next question.
Thanks very much, Xingdong. You really made it very clear about the catalytic important role of infrastructure in terms of economic development and growth. And of course, demonstrating the fact how fundamental it is to achieving most, if not all, of the sustainable development goals and overall creating that positive social impact. However, I'd be very interested to get your views to drill down. I know you've touched on some areas, and we all know that we're very focused with the whole COVID-19 issue. But there is this other pandemic that is quite silent and is ever present called climate change, as we all know. So I'd be very interested to, in the context of that infrastructure, role, to get your views on the associated environmental costs that come along with that approach.
Yes, thank you, Hubert. Certainly, we're coming to the core of the issue. Climate change is such a global concern. It's funny that this year, in this side of the continent, we are running out of names for hurricanes, and we have to resort to Greek letters, and just to show the frequency of natural disasters. And in Asia, which is economically the most active region, every year natural disaster brings more than $100 billion of devastation to the region. So certainly climate sustainability is something that we all have to be very concerned. Now, there has been a bit of a dilemma, because between infrastructure and climate, sometimes it is complementary, sometimes it is at a crossroad, right? For example, coal-fired power plant provides probably needed electricity, for a region or a community to be able to benefit from broadband internet and from manufacturing activities, and yet it would add to the global challenge of carbon emission and climate change. So we really have to be very clear-headed in making sure that when we design infrastructure project, sustainability goes to the core, right? And we all know that Europe has committed to be carbon neutral by 2050, and China just announced that they will become carbon neutral by 2060. Now, because when you do power plants, it's not a 2-year or 3-year, okay, I'm going to get to carbon neutral by 2050, and therefore when I build a plant in 2045, I'll start worrying about it. You have to start to worry about it now, right? So how do we make sure renewable energy, new energy sources, whether it's hydropower, whether it's wind farm, solar farm, goes into critical national energy plan now rather than 20 years later? It is really, really very urgent. Now, when it comes to natural disaster, it is another thing that we really have to build resilience. I would know, because when Asian tsunami happened, where hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives, I was based in Manila, working for the Asian Development Bank. I saw the devastation, right? And, from that point on, whether it's tsunami, earthquake, whether it's nuclear power plants being overwhelmed by tsunami, and therefore producing even more environmental concerns, all of this actually happen with more frequency. So this is why I think in our infrastructure plan in the World Bank Group, what we wanted to do is really, when every 3-4 years, when we sit down with countries to map what we call a country partnership framework. We put sustainability, we put climate in the center of our strategy in addressing them. Therefore, renewable energy certainly has become a big part of our strategic plan. But now, because we're talking to asset owners, I'm the treasurer of the World Bank, where we issue the world's first green bond. I really wanted to give a shout out to you, to the CFA Society. That is where we can collectively raise awareness and then purposefully channel our assets into supporting climate-friendly infrastructure financing, right? This is where we can collectively make a difference. Now, on the other hand, let me also say that infrastructure financing gap is over $1 trillion a year, right? Numbers differ from 1 trillion to 2 trillion a year, but nevertheless, it is a huge number. And, given every government is overburdened with their own domestic issues. You can't really rely on public financing to solve our infrastructure finance and funding gap. Therefore, asset owners through different asset classes, through the work that we do, how can we make sure that infrastructure financing in developing countries become an attractive asset class, right? Mm-hmm. It makes a decent commercial return while also addressing sustainability head on. That is, hey, I'm doing a solar farm, I'm doing a wind farm in a way that provides cheap energy to the local community, but also doing it in a commercially viable way that I can attract global savings to come to me. And this is where our green bond, our SDG bonds play a key role in attracting global savings and then risk transform them into development finance and resources. We can drill down on that later on, but let me just stop here and go back to you, Hubert.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are great. Those are great examples. But whenever we talk about this, we're never shy of getting down to really unpacking some of the real issues. And as you know, in terms of infrastructure finance, it'd be really great to get your views on the financing challenges that you see in terms of promoting sustainable finance with the SDGs. There are lots of different perceptions about, if you pursue this particular route, as you began to allude to, it impairs commercial returns. It's not necessarily in line with asset owners' mandates. But I think you've had a very different experience. So it'd be great to hear how you see the challenges and your success stories in terms of overcoming some of those challenges. So over to you, Jingdong.
Thank you, Hubert. That's a great question. Look, let me answer them in a couple of different angles. The first angle is that, look, for each and every asset owner, you may have 500 million, a billion, 2 billion, a trillion, whatever it is, right? Each individual would want to generate alpha for their company or for their entities. However, collectively, we all live in a single planet, right? Sustainability of the planet will drive so that it is not really alpha. Collectively, everybody has to earn a beta. That beta has to be that the world becomes a better place, where through smart investing in infrastructure, we build up economic activity, wealth level, for every country in the world, and therefore all asset owners benefit by the entire world going to a better place, right? So that, at a very macro level, it's funny because when I had a conversation with Mizuno-san, who used to be the CIO of Japan's government pension fund, and they have a small fund of $1.3 trillion, right?
It's too small for us to discuss here.
Yes, indeed. And he says, I can't really generate alpha. My alpha is the beta for the world, right? Yeah. In the sense that you really have to look at the global sustainability, the world becoming a better place. So the first angle is that, for asset owners, we really have to see a better future for the world, a sustainable world, as the ultimate return on our investment. That's number one. Number two is, indeed, even our work in the World Bank, including my own experiences, both at the World Bank and ISC, when designed well, infrastructure projects in emerging market countries can be profitable, while you are also supporting sustainability, right? Recently, about 2 years ago, I think the World Bank Group worked on a large-scale solar farm in Egypt. And the way we did it is really innovative. A typical approach would be a private sector sponsor from a developed country, a solar farm builder would go to the country, lobby government, to secure a power purchasing agreement and to, secure a piece of land and whatever it is. But that is time consuming. And each investor is very concerned with my own ability to be successful in that project. What we have done, working with the Egyptian government, is that why don't we holistically look in the next couple of years, how many solar farms would be needed for the country? Then, in one setting, we regularize and standardize a power purchase agreement with the government that is transparent to all private sector investors, right? Then that plan, and I don't remember the actual number, I remember it's 13 solar farms, then go in the open to say, hey, we're going to have 13 solar farms to be built. If you want to come in, IC will be co-financing, the World Bank will be working with the government to make sure regulatory framework is there, and MEGA will provide, political insurance for commercial investors to go in. So in this very innovative way, we are able to upscale an infrastructure package from a piecemeal to a holistic approach. And that, when the project was done, I was still in with ISC. We were able to syndicate several $100 million from commercial investors that came in, and the solar farm produced a per kilowatt price that is very acceptable to the government. So I think there are ways that we can make sure that we provide the enabling environment, reform the regulatory framework where a renewable energy project can be done in an innovative new financing package to make it, achieving all the purpose, doing good by doing well by doing good, where nobody has to sacrifice their commercial return, right? On the other hand, the third element I wanted to mention is that if we work together, private sector, public sector, international development banks, multilateral community, bilateral community together, to make a country's economic and social progress sustainable in a virtuous cycle, what it means that the risk premium will continue to drop, right? So maybe you think 5% is now, maybe it will go to 4%. So your ongoing project financing will be more valuable down the road. Yeah. So I think what I'm trying to say is that, work with us, through the World Bank Group, through multilateral institutions, where we work with government, we work with private sector to make sure everything we do is sustainable. So I think, I hope that example shows that I don't think sustainability and commercial return necessarily have to be contradictory. We have seen many successes where you can achieve both.
Fantastic. No, spot on there as ever, Jingdong. I mean, that model that you've talked about in Egypt, and the overall approach is one that we share and subscribe to from the global asset owners community, and that was in large part one of the motivations as to why we thought, let us try to play our role as a key stakeholder in the ecosystem, including governments, development finance institutions, multilateral development banks, civil society, and the public sector, by really mapping out a framework that not only demonstrates how one can align their infrastructure investments, both current and potential, with the SDGs, but also demonstrates how that impact can be measured in both financial and social terms. So, the asset owner community, I can't talk highly enough about our commitment in this particular regard to play our full role in the pursuit and attainment of the sustainable development goals and the pursuit of the highest levels of ESG standards. But I'd like to get, you've touched on it throughout our keynote interview today. But I'd be really interested for you to just drill down again on, in your view, what is the role of institutional investors and what type of financial instruments are available to mobilize investments into sustainable infrastructure?
Okay, Hubert, we're now coming to the nitty-gritty, and this is an area I love. And I like to, at the end, be able to really address ESG. And also, I have an additional head, in addition to be the treasurer of the World Bank. I'm also the head of the World Bank Group pension, overseeing $30 billion of assets invested in all asset classes from private equity, hedge fund to fixed income. So certainly be happy to share our own journey on ESG. But let me start by saying this, that is, for the world to develop, especially for developing countries, we need each and every asset class, and they address different issues, right? In poor countries, certainly equity is important because equity is a primary source for capital formation, for entrepreneurship, for the first stage of an entrepreneur's idea gets implemented, right? That is the equity space. Now, of course, from angel capital, venture fund, private equity, public equity, IPO, so on and so forth. So that's one big bucket of asset classes. And of course, ISE does a lot of that in co-investing through its own balance sheet, private equity, and inviting many, private equity space investors into opportunities in entrepreneurship. The second big bucket, of course, is project financing, which is loans, right? Unsecured, senior loans, fixed income, so on and so forth. This is where bond market plays a critical role. And I think through our 3 AAA rated balance sheet, this is the IBRD balance sheet, where I'm the treasurer, where IBRD supports middle income governments in their economic plan. The balance sheet of IDA, this is also a part of the World Bank, and I'm the treasurer of IDA, where using bond market, we provide additional resources in addition to replenishment donor money into supporting 60, 70 poorest country. And yet bond markets start to play a role because we have a AAA rated balance sheet to be tapped into. And of course, ISC issues bonds also in international bond market, where through their bond, you can participate in project finance and so on and so forth. And of course, they have a syndicated loan platform. So we have a multitude of platforms where we can provide co-financing opportunity. Now, for the World Bank, just to be sure that our AAA rated bond is a primary source where we connect the international savings into development finance and with the government. And there we have been using SDG and green bond as a handle to, first of all, highlight our commitment, raise awareness, and attract more investors into this space, right? So we have 2 big tickets. One is the green bond. Of course, the World Bank, invented the green bond label in 2008 when we issued the world's first green bond, working with Swedish asset owners and Swedish investment bank. It's a couple of $100 million, and now the green bond market is over $1 trillion in a short space of 12 years. That's an amazing metamorphosis of an idea, now coming into the asset class that is becoming mainstream. So that itself has demonstrated the power of thematic bond. And then, we started to think how we can mainstream this label into everything we do. And therefore, every bond the World Bank issues now is called an SDG bond. We actually then, depending on the different thematic area, we actually give it a label. It could be a bond, SDG bond, addressing nutrition for children, or women's health, or food waste, or ocean pollution, right? In addition to the green bond. Now, the way we do it, and that's where asset owners, I think collectively we are making it a global standard. It's not only by going through investor roadshow, it is in our effort to make sure we bring transparency and the highest global disclosure standard to make sure these are asset classes that are trusted by international investors and asset owners, right? Therefore, of course, on green bond, we sit as the executive committee of ICMA in the green bond standard. The same in terms of SDG bond, we just published the first disclosure report or impact report really telling those asset owners who bought our bond, your money has gone to this, and this is the actual impact. So maybe a word on ISC, because in addition to the bond, ISC has a syndicated loan platform, right? Where in the fixed income space, away from the AAA rated bond, you can come in and join a syndicated project financing, through, if you are more risk tolerant, you can come in as a first loss investor. If you are less risk tolerant, you can be a senior tranche investor. If you wanted to participate in the same risk as IC in project financing, LIBOR plus 400, 500, depending on the credit risk, then you can participate, without going into different tranches, right? That is the asset class you can certainly do. But let me also mention, before I return the mic to you, is that the World Bank Group, in addition to the project financing we do, there is so much research, there is so much data that we share. That itself is a portal for asset owners to discover opportunities, right? I'll give you a couple examples. We now actually have an ESG, data portal where you can click and analyze government data on how each government is committed on ESG and various parameters. We have a global doing business ranking where we show how friendly a country is, to private sector. And we actually actively work with government to do reform. Hubert, you and I know that in Africa, Rwanda is a fantastic example, jumping from the bottom of the pack when it comes to friendliness to private sector to one of the top performers in doing business, right? So this global standard setting, disclosure, transparency, in addition to actual financing goes into the country, it is really the whole package that the World Bank Group provide that asset owners can take advantage of, when partnering with them. Back to you.
Thank you, Jingdong. You've really helped us understand your journey and your commitment, both at the individual level as well as at the institutional level, about integrating and being innovative and creating products. And we certainly, as the asset owner community, felt it was very important that we tried to come up with our ability to almost take the data and create what might be described as infratech, data that can be used by multiple different parties for different reasons, that can actually have a real development outcome or support analysis to forge towards the pursuit of the sustainable development goals. So you've talked about it from the side of the sort of the World Bank. But I'd be in closing, I'd really be interested to get your recommendations to asset owners that are interested in following their own sort of integration of sustainability journey, especially in the context of your special area being that sustainable finance into the investment portfolios. Just, what journey is recommended? We at the framework level will be taking existing data from some of your sources, the work that a number of the fund managers or the investment managers or the project developers or the governments are doing. But it'd be really interesting to get your views and recommendations to our community of asset owners, about how to sort of integrate that sustainability and sustainable finance into our investment portfolios and approach. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Hubert. So in this regard, I switched my role from Treasurer of the World Bank to Head of the World Bank Group Pension. And also, for your information, I have been sitting on the Pension Finance Committee, which is equivalent to the board of the pension for the past 10 years. And certainly was part of the board that made that progress from having non-ESG in our pension investment to fully embracing ESG as critical factors we consider. So let me walk that journey a little bit. I think we are very happy that we have now established the ESG integration approach that aims to identify, measure, and manage material ESG risks in the entire investment process. And we firmly believe that proper, objective, and well-informed ESG integration should enable investors to price in not only idiosyncratic ESG risks related to a particular asset, but also broader negative social and environmental externalities, right? So to the extent that we can achieve that, we could see impact investing and ESG integration convergent in the long term in an ideal scenario. So what is necessary for us to get there? As you said, data and disclosure as a cornerstone that can enable investors to ensure that ESG integration efforts are in alignment with the sustainability goal of the SDG and the climate accord. So, how do we then collectively, consider promoting greater and better ESG disclosure in companies and corporations with our public and private portfolio is a journey we are all walking, through to get to a better place, right? For the World Bank group pension, we certainly are currently in the process of incorporating this as a key goal of our ESG integration in the due diligence process and through engagement with our external asset managers. And this is also a key objective of our corporate engagement plan with our responsible ownership approach. So I certainly would welcome more efforts to provide investors with tools to understand the underlying impact of their portfolio. And I believe that a thorough understanding of such impact, both negative and positive, will lead us all not only to have more transparent and reliable impact investing reporting framework, but also enable a more meaningful and effective ESG integration process. So with regard to infrastructure as an asset class, we have noted a significant progress in the approach that asset managers are undertaken to integrate material ESG risks and to report on the management ESG issues within their portfolio. So among the key best practice we observed and we try to practice, I can mention the following, right? So adoption of a formal ESG policy that clearly outlines, in particular, the firm's ESG integration approach, responsibility and reporting lines with regard to ESG, the firm's responsible ownership approach, and how it objectively manages ESG issues at the portfolio company level, and commitment to regular reporting and disclosure. Now, on ESG integration, do we have well-documented, systematic, consistent consideration of relevant ESG issues in the investment analysis and the objective identification and measurement of material ESG risks associated with an investment opportunity, which should be in line with internationally recognized principles, standards, or criteria. When it comes to responsible ownership, do we have formal, relevant, and consistent KPIs assigned to each portfolio company that can enable tracking progress against core sustainability performance goals, and to make sure that to nurture and promote good corporate governance that is conducive to proper management of relevant ESG risks and improve sustainability performance, and also to promote corporate reporting and disclosure on key sustainability and ESG metrics. Now, finally, on reporting and disclosure, we certainly would strongly encourage infrastructure asset managers to adopt a formal, consistent, and timely reporting on their ESG work program, a sustainability effort, through regular annual reports at investors' meetings and through other appropriate channels. So, understanding how all these efforts connect with the SDGs is a welcome development. And I'm sure this will allow institutional investors and asset owners to increase their capacity to integrate sustainability in a more structured and consistent manner in their investment process. So we are walking that journey ourselves, and very happy to have a continuous dialogue. And the fact that we have dedicated ESG staff on our pension plan showcases, our strong commitment. And certainly, as we make progress, very happy to have a continuous sharing with asset owners through the great work that you do. So, Hubert, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jingdong. This brings the keynote interview to a close. I think your final words have really teed us up very nicely for the following launch panel and discussion. I think your commitment is inspiring. I would also hope that the bank is inspired by the commitment from the asset owners community, if not for any other reason than, 2 to 3 years ago, the incorporation and integration of ESG practices was still a moot issue. But today, there's a unanimous and resounding commitment from our global asset owner community to pursue not only ESG, but we've actually even gone one step further and set ourselves the highest standard of the expectations around ESG, because when you, as you know, add in the SDGs component, you actually have to deliver ESG at its highest quotient to be able to actually achieve or impact the SDGs. So we're certainly aligned, and we certainly value our friendship and partnership with you as we walk this journey together as our communities. So thank you again, Jingdong, for gracing us with your presence and insights. Very stimulating at the launch of the CFA SDGs and ESG Infrastructure Investment Impact Framework. And we all very much wish you a very successful annual meetings week and look forward to our ongoing collaboration. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Hubert. Development without financing is simply empty talk. And therefore, asset owners play a critical role in making sure the future of development is sustainable, inclusive, equitable, and resilient. And I wish your conference a great success and look forward to continued engagement and partnership.
Thank you very much, Jingdong. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.